Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is U.S. Immigration Attorney Hard Trapathy from Trip Law. Today, I want to talk about a very important situation right now going on in these great United States of America with respect to the government shutdown. We've had a lot of questions here at our firm about how will the government shutdown affect my case, Attorney Trapathy? Well, it depends on where your case is at, right? It could be with USCIS, you could be suffering from some deportation matter, you might have a business immigration case, you might even be dealing with visa or consular-based situations or customs issues. So we're actually going to take a deep dive into every single agency and discuss how the government shutdown will affect your immigration case as a whole. So first and foremost, when we look at what the government shutdown does, this is where ultimately the House and the Senate, both Republicans and Democrats, are unable to ultimately decide on the funding that would be appropriated to keep the government open. And as a result, this takes into effect at the administrative level with respect to administrative processing of your immigration case. So today we're going to talk about key principles that are very important to know. So all these operations that are going on are going to depend on whether the agency that you're working with is either going to be fee funded or whether it's appropriated, meaning that it's taxpayer funded, meaning that Congress is allocating a certain amount of money to these agencies to conduct governmental affairs and make sure that the immigration cases do proceed as they usually should if the government was open. However, because the government is shut down, this can cause now delays to those agencies because of the lack of resources that are allocated. So as a result, that since there's not as much taxpayer funding being provided, that means the agency has less money to work with, which means that you as the immigrant or you as the loved one of the immigrant are going to have a delay in that case. So before we even get into it, we have to understand, what does essential or accepted functioning mean, right? So essential functions are those that are required, they're essential. Think about COVID. These are things where it's essential work that needs to be done regardless of whether the government is closed or not. And accepted are functions that basically are those that need to protect that life, property, or constitutional right so that even if there is a lapse with respect to these services occurring, those are still considered accepted or AKA essential. So if you look at prior shutdowns, they did cause a lot of wide delays, right? There were suspensions of non-essential work, there was case backlogs historically, and there was a lot of rescheduling of these hearings with EOIR and the Executive Office of Immigration Review and those immigration courts. However, each shutdown is different, and with respect to basically how long that shutdown will last, how the agencies will interpret what is considered essential or not, and ultimately what ends up happening in terms of the government and the executive working with the legislature with respect to contingency plans that will be deployed to handle the government shutdown. So let's dive into deportation because that seems to be a very hot topic. These are basically removal proceedings with EOIR, which is the Executive Office of Immigration Review under the U.S. Department of Justice. And usually ICE is involved in this as well. So how does it work in the immigration court and EOIR context? Well, in past shutdowns, these non-detained dockets, which are basically those cases where the respondent, meaning the immigrant, is not in custody, has typically been suspended, right? And with hearings postponed, there causes delays until that funding is restored. And then with respect to detained dockets, those are where cases are individuals or immigrants that are in custody. These cases are generally prioritized, and they will or may continue because delaying them will cause constitutional due process issues. It'll also create custody issues. So these are very serious issues where someone's rights are being affected. So as a result, it's technically considered to be essential. Now, in the current shutdown, we have seen with the Trump administration, along with the Republican-held Congress, along with the Democrats who are also looking at not funding the clean CR bill that was passed, you're actually seeing that there's indication that courts will basically remain open for those non-detained cases as well. But this is basically a departure from what was used in past practice. So the DOJ also, along with the EOIR, has invoked in these deportation type matters that there is a national emergency regarding undocumented immigration. So they're declaring many EOIR and court employees as accepted from the furlough. So which means that they will allow continuity to continue these processes. So if you are in immigration proceedings in immigration court, generally speaking, because it's considered a national emergency by the government, this will be considered accepted. Now, during earlier shutdowns, tens of thousands of these hearings were canceled or they were left blank in the docket system, but now you're starting to see that they're still going to continue in the current administration. Now, when hearings are postponed, it's very important to note that the court will issue you, the immigrant, another notice of hearing once that funding returns and then the government is once again funded. Now, how will this affect ICE and enforcement and removal operations within the Department of Homeland Security? Well, with ICE enforcement, detention, and those removal operations, those are considered essential as per the government because they are something that the government has prioritized, so they will be considered accepted, so that means they will tend to continue even during a government shutdown. Now, if you think of legal representation, support services such as ICE check-ins or bond hearings or monitoring of immigrants, they may still face some disruptions, however, because in order for the logistical support of the staff and the administration and the scheduling and all that to take place, there may be delays because of the lack of funding being slowed down and the government not being open. Now, the prosecutorial arm of this whole EOIR process, which is OPLA, the Office of the Principal Legal Advisor, they may focus more on detainees, basically those detained cases, or priority cases where the immigrant is deemed to be a flight risk or a national security threat. Well, then even if resources are constrained, they will continue to keep moving forward. Now let's basically take a shift, right? Let's look at USCIS. These are these family-based cases and things of that nature where there is administrative processing taking place, and there's also benefits being allocated to these immigrants. Well, USCIS overall, generally speaking, their operations are primarily what's called fee-funded, which we talked about earlier in this video, meaning that immigrants will ultimately pay money for their application. So many of those services, since they are fee-funded and not actually appropriated by the government, a lot of those processes will continue even during a shutdown. However, USCIS may become a lot slower because of the capacity that they can handle, because they will, because of the government shutdown, have to maybe reassign staff from less critical tasks that they're handling, or they'll focus more on those mandatory tasks. So some of the non-mandatory tasks may be slowed down. A lot of USCIS programs, however, do rely on appropriated funds rather than those filing fees, so those could be suspended. So examples of that could be the E-Verify system. That's likely going to be unavailable during the shutdown. You'll also see the Conrad 30 J1 Physician Waiver Program. That could be paused because it does depend on appropriations, because that's how it was congressionally written. You also may have these religious worker R visa programs and smaller grant-funded categories that could also be affected. And what you've also seen in the past, USCIS has allowed some flexibility with respect to these types of situations where they may accept late filings or late filing fees where the delay was caused by the shutdown. But once the shutdown ends, then it'll go back to normal. Another thing to note with USCIS is background checks, security checks, or any interagency coordinations can slow down as well. So think about if you have FBI background checks, you have Department of State working with USCIS, they could have limited operations because those funds are appropriated to the Department of State or the FBI. So that could cause delays in your immigration processing. Now, with respect to the administrative processing and pending cases that are technically considered quote unquote administrative processing, those could be things like security reviews, visa applications that are abroad. Those could also face delays because if the underlying agencies or those consulates have limited staffing due to the government shutdown, it can cause delays in your immigration case. Now, USCIS's online case status systems will typically be accessible during the shutdown. However, there could be potential delays, but we're monitoring that situation as it occurs. Now, also as important, interviews will generally continue as well because they're considered what's called a core function as part of the immigration process. So if you're getting naturalized, or maybe you're doing an adjustment of status with your loved one, who's your spouse, for example, or you're trying to look at asylum applications for those interviews, they will most likely continue because they're very core to the functioning of the USCIS as a whole. Overall, the cases will continue. However, logistical support and local field office staffing or scheduling, the mailing that's going to happen and take place, all those logistics will be strained or slowed down due to the government shutdown. Now let's go into Department of Labor and let's talk about employment-based immigration and the Department of Labor itself. So many employment-based immigration processes are going to depend on the Department of Labor. You're looking at these LCAs or those labor condition applications, prevailing wage determinations, those PWDs. Also perm labor certification for a lot of these EB3 programs. Those could be potentially delayed depending on how the Department of Labor, based on the timing of the shutdown, will handle or see what their agenda and goals are as well. Furthermore, you will see a shutdown of the Office of Foreign Labor Certification, the OFLC. They're likely going to want to halt or severely curtail a lot of the processing that's going to take place. You're going to see the whole flag system that's filed or that's used, for filing those online DOL filings. They may go offline or be inaccessible because those are funded also by appropriations, with a certain amount of money being allocated to that flag system for that technology to stay up to date. But obviously when there's a government shutdown, they're not getting paid. Hence the flag system could shut down, meaning you might have delays in your EB3 processing that we do here. We've seen a lot of our business clients realize that there are delays now being caused due to that. You can also find out that employers, on the employer side of it, with respect to the business immigration context, they might not be able to file new LCAs or perm applications because it's going to cause further backlogs if they do, and more delays in H-1B examples or H-2 or EB-2 and EB-3 or other employment-based petitions as well. Now, we are seeing, a lot of times that USCIS might be able to access previously uploaded DOL data because it was uploaded prior to the shutdown, and that will lead to hopefully more continued adjudication of these petitions, but that's not always the case. Now, the longer the shutdown will continue on, the more and more backlogs will be created, and it'll create further risks of delay with respect to the process. And then let's finally go down to border, right? CBP, consular processing, State Department, visa operations. Let's quickly talk about that as well. With respect to CBP and border inspections, which are considered essential, the ports of entry, passport control type situations, those inspections will most likely continue. You're also going to see consular and visa operations, basically at the United States embassies and consulates abroad. Those are once again also fee funded, so they will also continue. But if the funds are already all used up or exhausted, or let's say staffing is depleted because people aren't showing up to work and things of that nature, then only emergency or limited operations will continue to persist because they're going to focus on high priority cases versus low priority cases. Now, you will see a lot of delays in visa interviews at the embassy. Consular services may be delayed or rescheduled, specifically at smaller consulates or posts where they have tighter budgets. And you're also going to see that students overall, scholars, others who want to come to the United States that need that visa stamp, that could also potentially cause delays because the visa stamping ability will be delayed and backlogged, which leads to further complications. So overall, ladies and gentlemen, if you're listening to this video, the government shutdown can be very tough for you as the immigrant watching in, but just know that cases are still moving. They're just probably going to move a little slower. You will see increased backlogs, longer wait times for cases and appointments and hearings while this whole government shutdown is going through the pipeline in Congress. You'll also see bottlenecks in these employment-based processing cases if the Department of Labor decides to go non-operational. And you'll see very strategic rush filings ahead of the shutdown deadlines, which are becoming more and more common in case you want to prepare for future shutdowns. You will see that. There are a lot of uncertainties and fee refunds and case reschedulings and administrative burdens, but hopefully the Congress will figure it out so that way the immigrants and the United States populace will continue to move forward as normal. There will be more pressure on immigration attorneys and representatives who are continuing to monitor status changes right now. Our law firm is looking at all these cancellations and notices. We are looking at miscommunication that's occurring or missed deadlines if notices are mailed late or are delayed. This can also cause potential litigation and lawsuits and motions to be filed as a result of the delays. And in extreme cases, you're also going to see the operational and budgetary cuts for all these reorganizations that will need to take place used as an opportunity for then Congress to impose further policy changes, which will hopefully create a positive impact on immigrants and immigration law and policy as a whole. So overall, what can you do as the immigrant right now? Like what do you need to do? Well, through your attorney, we will make sure we monitor any agency announcements that do come out, any contingency plans at USCIS, DOL, EOIR, DOS. We'll check that. We'll also check case statuses online for you regularly. We'll make sure we pay attention to any hearing notices that are out if you're in the immigration deportation context. We'll also make sure that we're submitting critical filings for you with impending deadlines because we understand that the shutdown could delay certain documentation and certain correspondence. We'll also make sure that the documents that are impacted or negatively per se due to inaccessibility of these DOL systems, court closures and things like that, We'll basically help you file motions for relief. We'll also make sure that we coordinate with you, the client, to make sure that you're keeping on check with all of your hearings. You're making sure you're going to your ICE check-ins. You're being compliant with USCIS and ICE obligations and evidentiary obligations. And in the employment-based context, we're going to try to help advance that DOL filing and prepare for those backlogs so that we set these realistic expectations with you and make sure we're staying compliant with accordance to the law. So I know this was a little longer of a video, but such an important topic because the government shutdown is real. It is happening as the date of this video, and we just wish you the best of luck. If you have any questions, please feel free to call our law office at 863-599-6735, and we definitely look forward to working with you as you navigate these complex areas of immigration law, and on top of that, have to work with the government shutdown. So we wish you the best of luck with your immigration journey. Thank you for your time, and have a great rest of your day.